It's my pleasure to introduce Jarno Elovirta, the main developer of the DITA-OT toolkit, to entertain us with a very interesting session, I think. Jarno?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Anyone? Yeah. Okay, brilliant. So it was actually Robert who came up with the description that I'll entertain you. Not sure if this will be at all entertaining. A quick question, show of hands, how many of you sort of identify as a developer who might be able to or interested in doing something in the Open Toolkit core? Okay, so a few. Oh. So this talk is for you to see what's inside OT and how easy it might be to get into it. It's not magic. So for those people who didn't raise their hands, this talk is for you to see that the pre-processing part of OT isn't magic. It's just simple blocks of code that do a specific thing. And if at some point you decide you want to get into coding, this is a really nice place to start with that. So I changed the title of the talk because I had problems coming up with a suitable title. But as before, the DITA-OT day hashtag is there. Use it if you're into Twitter. If you have questions, please just shout and ask. And you don't even need to run about to get the microphone. I'll just try and repeat the question. If you have opinions, let's deal with them in the end. You understand. So this is sort of a rehash of the talk I gave 2 years ago, where I went through the pre-processing part of Open Toolkit. But this is about what changed since that 2014 talk. And this is sort of a third talk I'm talking or presenting about the same subject, just because this is where I spend most of my time when developing OT. We can talk about why I'm so interested in this part, but we can sort of leave that to another day. So the TLDR, too long didn't read, description is that the pre-processing part is still the same furball. We just added a few dragons, so beware, because George told us that a few years ago Open Toolkit was a black box, and I'm probably the only one who likes to keep it as a black box, because then I can break things internally and change things internally and no one will notice. So here's the vanity slide. I've been involved in DITA for about 10 years. I lost most of my hair during that time, but I've grown as a person. So I wear two hats. I occasionally develop code on top of the Open Toolkit for customers. It's usually transformation-specific customization. But then the rest is a hobby. That's when I do most of the work or all of the work for pre-processing. So two hats. But it allows me to do different things with the different hat. I work for a full-stack consultancy called Wunderdog. Most of my time is spent on things not related to DITA or XML or technical communication. But if someone wants to purchase our services, we're available. And it's really small, not a plug, but just a note that Wunderdog has a small open source initiative. You get some compensation for working for open source projects on your spare time. That doesn't really help because I don't have spare time, but if you run a company and you have few extra euros, you might think about supporting open source, not just Open Toolkit. You can use it on some JavaScript library if you feel like it, or your developers feel like it, but supporting open source might be a good thing. Keeps your developers happy. So this presentation is mostly about 2.4 of Open Toolkit and 3.x, the next version. I know not everyone has migrated to 2.4 yet, or even 2.x, but not sure if anyone wants to listen how the 1.x works. Also because I don't remember how it works anymore. So I'm trying to use 2.2 as a baseline to describe what's new in the current stable version. I'll probably make mistakes, and someone is allowed to shout that was shipped in 2.1 or something like that. But I'm sort of talking about the current stable version, the latest one, and the future. So Open Toolkit hasn't changed that much at this level since 1.0. So it's still implemented in Java and XSLT. We're not going to ship over to C++ because it's faster, because it wouldn't be necessarily, and we're not going to rewrite anything. So this is the technology stack. So if you're interested, these are the few languages we're going to use in the future too. But the ratio between languages has shifted over time. Sometimes some things get re-implemented in XSLT, and then most of the time re-implemented in Java. And we can talk about whether that makes any sense, but again, come and talk to us after the conference, even if we're staring at our feet, being the introverted coders we are. But still, sort of one thing I'd like to mention about the XSLT Java split, which some of you may be oblivious to, is that we're always trying to find a suitable hammer to hammer in those screws, even if the screws are different. So historically, OT processing has been in different stages. It's usually two. It's the pre-processing and then the transformation-specific stuff. There's the base HTML processing, which really doesn't exist as a separate step, but think in terms of different steps that the content flows through. The pre-processing is common to all transformation types, as everyone already knows. While it's common to all transformation types, that doesn't mean that pre-processing will produce the same output for every transformation type. So the traditional example is filtering based on the output type, print yes, no. So when you're publishing to PDF, the things that have been marked as print no will be filtered out. So that's one of the differences. But of course, I still know that many people produce PDFs and put them on a website so people can browse through the PDF on their web browser, which makes absolutely no sense. So it doesn't mean that if you produce PDF, it's for print. But that's sort of your problem. So pre-processing is the part that prepares content for sort of general consumption for transformation types. And the idea is that we're trying to offload as much work from the transformation types to the pre-processing, so that the transformation types, your customizations or the XSLT that we have, for example, HTML, doesn't have to do that much. But of course, in the end, we want to do as little as possible in the pre-processing, because every time you do something, it consumes time, and people probably want their transformations to be faster than before. So the pre-processing itself as a blob hasn't changed that much since 2.2, but one of the new features compared to, for example, 1.x is that you can now give just a URL as an input file to the pre-processing, and it'll fetch it for you. It can fetch, for example, files over HTTP. So again, the TLDR of pre-processing, it's that it makes complex data structures simple. I thought about this. Do I tell you that it makes complex data content simple? Well, content might be the text. We're not actually touching the text. We're not making your written content more simple. But DITA has, I don't know what you'd call them. What would be a good word for conrefs, chunking, key refs? Those data processing features, we're simplifying those or removing them, normalizing them out, so you will get actual simple data structures. Is anyone here familiar with the term syntax sugar? Brilliant. So syntax sugar is just a nice syntax in a programming language that hides something more complex behind it. And programming language compilers, they resolve syntax sugar, something that is simple and short to type, into something more complex in the background. So, and the term for resolving that is desugaring. So, in a way, what we're doing with pre-processing is that we're desugaring the complex things, or actually it's in reverse order when you think about it now. So we're simplifying the complex things like keys into something hideously simple DITA 1.0 level content. And if you look at the results of pre-processing, you're basically looking at DITA 1.0 level content. You might have new elements, but there's nothing complex that you need to resolve in your head. Where does this sixth level indirection come from? We resolve all of that. And George will talk about how to hook into this and reuse it in some places. Yeah, so here on the right-hand side, I have a list of all the steps in pre-processing if you look at the AND file. So quite a few. We'll just try and run through these. I'll describe what they do, just to give you an understanding how it works. In most cases, you can ignore the names. They might not be meaningful. They're the same names that we used ages ago, or the IBM developers used, and we just haven't changed those because we don't want to break backwards compatibility. But in the end, OpenToolkit is about a 10-year-old project. The way we do things now isn't perfect. It's not necessarily even remotely correct. But I'll get to that on my third to last slide. So the first thing we do is we read all the content based on your input file. And we create sort of a cache of metadata in a file called .job.xml. It's a bucket of information. So this is completely invisible to users. You will never actually see this phase if you're your transformation customizer. And this is the first time filtering is done, during this phase when we read in the topics. Then we get to the next stage where we actually get those topics and stick them in the temporary directory, which is in this case is the bucket. So the unfortunate bit with this design is that we have to do the reading part twice to support up levels. Everyone knows what up levels are. Everyone dislikes them. And then we have to also do it for subject scheme. It takes some CPU cycles, takes some time, but this is in 2 phases. It's really not a big deal unless you're actually fetching those resources over wire using, for example, HTTP, then it might take longer. So I've deliberately used the bucket instead of the term temp directory. The bucket is really the temp directory, but it doesn't have to be. I'll get back to that. And one of the features or facets of this bucket is that while we might be reading in, for example, Markdown, what goes into the bucket is XML. So during these first stages, we convert everything that's not XML data into XML data. And right now, Markdown is more or less the only thing that does it. But in the bucket, you'll find the XML presentation of the data files. And since 2.4, the temporary file names in the temp dir aren't necessarily the same as you have in the source. So you have foo.dita. It might not map to foo.dita anymore if you configure the system to work like that. That's one of the features we're developing further in 3.0. And that's sort of mandatory to get some of the new cool stuff out for 3.0. And again, this does filtering, but now it does it with subject schemes. Of course, if you don't have subject schemes, it doesn't do it without. Copy2 used to be part of this stage, but we took it out. Copy2 is still processed, it's just in a different place. Then we resolve map references, create one huge map. This used to be later in the chain. In previous versions, we had to move it up to be sort of the first thing we do, just because key processing required us to have the full map. Not a particularly interesting part of the pre-processing. It's implemented in XSLT, so feel free to look at the code there. Then we handle branch filtering. I Googled for cat branch. So this is the new feature in DITA 1.3. So DITA 1.3 is really old now, actually. It's not new anymore, but it's sort of a newish thing in Open Toolkit. So what it just does is that it takes DITA filter or DITA valve references in the map and filters all the topics and the map itself based on those filters. It's a separate step from the normal DITA val filtering, but it, in theory, could be combined to this step too. It's just that we don't actually do this step if there are no branch filter elements in the map. It's a 3-step process implemented completely in Java. So if you're interested in looking at the Java code and hacking on it, this might be one of the modules you might want to take a look at. And this uses quite a common approach in processing for for Open Toolkit, that the map is processed using DOM API, so it keeps it in memory, but all the topics are processed using SACS, so completely filter-based processing, so it's faster and consumes less memory. Hope this is at a suitable level for the non-techies. Any questions? No? Yeah.
So you're saying you pull in everything in the
if I understood the question correctly, but then again, the question you had wasn't simple. Yeah. Then the most boring bit in OpenToolkit pre-processing is copying images, related HTML files, flag images. The problem with this step being here is that there's no one right answer what to do with the associated resources, whether to copy them to the bucket, the temporary folder, whether to copy them to the output folder, whether to not copy them anywhere because you're going to zip them up for some format, or your PDF renderer will read them directly from the source directory. So we're going to move this in the next version of OpenToolkit to be transformation specific. So transformations need to say what they want to do with images. Makes a lot more sense. Right now we're deciding that this is the correct thing. Tough. And this doesn't actually touch any of the files in the bucket or the temporary folder. So in theory, this could be run parallel to everything, or all the rest of the processing. Resolving keys. We built the key spaces, we resolve the keys in those key spaces, meaning the keyref and conkeyref attributes. And if we have to, we generate new resources, because if you need to resolve keys in two different spaces for the same topic, we need to create a copy of that, and then we'll just create a new ID or URL for it. I think it's funny that the most useful feature of DITA keys is just a single small module in the chain. It's not hideously simple, but it's just one single module, and it can do all sorts of magic to make your content easier to consume or use. Copy to attributes. We moved it here just because it makes sense to handle those after key processing. I don't know if you noticed that, but there was a huge bug in 2.0 or 2.1 related to how you use keys with copy to. It didn't work correctly. Now it works correctly. Hopefully it wasn't an issue for you. So it was split off from debug filter. Originally, actually, wait. Yeah, so now it's a separate step. What I'd like to do is handle all the copy to processing during pre-processing. So there wouldn't be any reason for transformation specific code to even know that copy to exists. It just makes for example, your XSLT is more complex, because you first have to check whether something has a copy to, and then if it doesn't, then check the href. So this is something that really should be completely removed from the content, and after pre-processing, this would be normalized away. But alas, we still haven't gotten there. And actually, internally, copy to or attributes similar to copy to are used internally by branch filtering. When branch filtering goes through the document, it actually automatically generates copy to attributes in a different namespace. But copy to is a quite useful sort of idea in the DITA content when you're massaging it to be something that's complete. Content references. Historically, these are in two different modules, conref push and conref. They could be a single module. But the thing is, right now you can switch their order, because the content may change depending on which you resolve first, because we can't really resolve them at the same time, or we don't want to. I don't know how many of you have switched the pre-processing step order for your customers. Very few. So most people just accept what's there. Right now we still allow those to be reordered. I don't know if anyone's reordered these two, but it's occasionally convenient. It's always been in this order, so we're not going to change it so we don't break your content. If you look at this code in 2.4, we no longer use the list files, something.list. Those list files are really ancient technology. So what we right now use is a custom AND element called file. No, it's actually file set. Doesn't make any sense. I wonder why I named it like that. So that reads the .job XML file and fetches the information from there. We don't serialize it into list files anymore. And in the end, the whole job .job XML file, it's an optimization. We could always just read everything again and have things working there. Filter conditional content. This is the third place we could do filtering. I think no one really uses this. You need to switch a toggle to move all the filtering from the beginning of the process to the end of the process. Does anyone actually use this step? Or they know that they're using? Yeah, so I didn't waste that much time implementing this, but you never know what will be useful for the users in the end. Most people just use the defaults. And again, this could be moved to be part of branch filtering. But on my, resolve topic fragments. So you have those ./x fragments that were introduced in DITA 1.3. Those are really processed at this stage. This is a useful feature, but implementation-wise, it's hideously boring. If you look at this code in AND in 2.4, I'm not going to show you the code. It's actually a SAX pipe that's configurable from AND. So you can configure which filters are ran to do something. So we're moving some of the SAX filter building from Java into the AND side, to the configuration side. Might make someone's life easier, not sure. I think I should tell more jokes because I feel this isn't entertaining enough. I gotta laugh, brilliant. Feel free to laugh at any moment. So code references with the code ref element. This is something that has been in DITA since 1.2. So it pulls code blocks into like snippets of code into code blocks. And if you notice, this is still on the topic fragment part. It used to be a separate step, but I moved it to be part of the same step as topic fragments because it's an optimization. You don't need to parse and serialize the XML 2 times. Alas, I can't change the name of the topic fragment, even though the function changed, because I'd break your custom code, or I would break it more. So it was just moved. So what happens between releases inside the pre-processing is that I move things around, and hopefully it's invisible. So the topic fragment consists of 2 XML filters that are run for the files. It's a bit like piping SAX is a bit like combining 2 XSLTs. You could do it with XSLT like that, but this doesn't keep anything in memory. It's streaming, so at least in theory, it's faster. I don't know what Michael K has been doing. It might be that using XLT in the end is faster. We need to measure that. So this is one of the places in pre-processing where we have extensions to the DITA spec, because in this case DITA spec doesn't disallow that. So we've been adding new or some features that are not part of the spec. I'll be presenting one of those things later on today, and a new thing in 2.4. Chunk topics. This breaks things into multiple topics, combines some. If you've heard me rant about this, you know that the code isn't optimal, and we don't support all the combinations of those chunk verbs. If you read the DITA 1.3 spec, well, not the whole one, but related to chunking, you notice that to navigation was deprecated because no one's using that. Well, I just had a customer who was actually doing a custom process to do exactly the thing that to navigation would solve. And apparently Robert has had the same experience. It's just that the to navigation only worked with Eclipse help transformation type, and not even a specialization of Eclipse help. The transformation type name had to be Eclipse help, written in lowercase together. A silly hard-coded thing in Open Toolkit that possibly influenced how DITA 1.3 was developed further. It could have been a useful feature, but there really was no use of it. So I think that's one of the reasons why it was deprecated. But I'll be happy to talk about chunking with anyone who's interested. But it's a useful feature of DITA. It's just that the current implementation is not the best one. I'll have to rant a bit. So chunking is the only DITA structure or functionality that creates new topic content by either splitting things in topics into multiple topics or combining them, and it does it based on the information that's in the map, but it can't determine what to do before it reads the topics. And this combination in a way makes chunking the most complex thing in DITA. And I'm not saying chunking should be removed from DITA 2.0 completely, but maybe the implementation just needs to get better. That's an opinion. Let's stick that to the end. Okay, right. Mine was an opinion too, so sorry. Then most of the stuff towards the end of processing is about handling how metadata cascades from topics to maps and backwards. And again, these are places where the code has evolved over time. Things have been combined to make things clearer, and it shouldn't be visible to the end users. I'm actually going to more or less skip these. Though I need to mention that historically, move meta entries was the place where you ran out of memory. Hopefully most of that has been fixed. But this is the place where you run out of memory because it reads everything in your temp directory into memory using XSLT. So that's why you used to run out of memory, and hopefully that has been fixed. Or, well, you're able to toggle a switch that makes it possible to not run out of memory anymore. And then you have map links that are sort of part of the same type of thing. You populate links from the map to topics. So because map has different like relationships between topics based on the map hierarchy. So you populate those into the topics. And then we have a simple thing like you have links to different topics. You haven't hard-coded the title, so this will fetch it for you. It's just that PDF already does it as a separate step, so we could skip this for PDF to make the processing time faster. But of course, then what this does is it pulls in the type attribute for example, footnotes. So footnote links start to break if we disable this. There's an open pull request. Please go and take a look. So at some point, I might start to disable this section just to get some more performance out of OpenToolkit pre-processing. And then there's Robert's contribution to pre-processing. This is completely Robert's implementation. We pre-process flagging during pre-process, so the transformation types don't need to care about the flagging information. It's already populated in there. Now, of course, not every transformation type uses flagging. Originally, I had an example that audio output wouldn't use flagging, but then again, actually it might have some sort of beeping noise to tell the listener that this is somehow flagged. And then we clean up the map because we're introducing craft into it. We're introducing attributes in a separate namespace to make things more simple. So we'll remove those in the end. We wouldn't actually have to remove those. In OpenToolkit, most of the XSLT that processes the results of pre-processing doesn't care about attributes in different namespaces, but we just want to be sure because someone might have written a transformation type that processes every attribute and then breaks. And unfortunately, this is one of the places where documentation is a bit lacking, and I'm not blaming you. The guy on the other side. So we haven't documented what comes out of pre-processing, and I should do that with the assistance of you, because if we document what comes out of pre-processing, people could start building things on top of it, and also when we document it, that sort of means that we can't break it because we've already said that this will be the stuff that comes out. And of course, it's really easy to implement things, but it's really, really hard to actually document those from a developer perspective. So you don't implement anything just because you don't want to do the work of documenting your work. So I didn't find I tried to find a photo in Google image search, cat jetpack. So I didn't find one, so I just took near cat. So there are a few things that I will be introducing in the future versions of OpenToolkit if I'm allowed to continue with the project. Like I said, I have two hats, working for customers doing customization of OpenToolkit, and then I have the sitting on my sofa watching NCSI on TV, not finding it hideously interesting and coding instead. So when I'm working for a customer, as probably most of you, you're pragmatic. You do the things that you need to do in order to get the project finished in time. So you don't necessarily cut corners, you don't necessarily produce bad code or unfit code, but you're being pragmatic. Whereas when you're doing it on your spare time, you can be really dogmatic. You want to do everything the right way. Of course, the right way can be wrong for most people, or your right way might be wrong for most people, but you're able to be really dogmatic and spend as much time on anything you want because it's your spare time. So the few next things will be my dogmatic take on what the pre-processing should be like. And they're sort of part of trying to optimize the pre-processing, because when you're a coder, you just try to optimize everything. Of course, the problem is that we don't actually measure the performance that well, and we don't have a level what is good enough set by the management or someone else. So we just decide that now this isn't fast enough, make it faster. So if we had a manager, they'd probably say, okay, you need to squeeze out 2 seconds, and then I'm happy. Traditionally, or until from the beginning, when you read in a file, for example, you had a script.dita in your source repository, it mapped to source.dita in the temporary folder. And maybe it had the parent directory there if you had up levels, or if the map was lower in the directory tree. And we've changed the code so that it doesn't have to be one-to-one mapping anymore. So what we can do is take the full source URI or URL, hash it, and then just produce a sort of random looking number or a string of characters and work with that. So that's one option. The other one that one large company apparently uses is that they take the full path of the original source file, then just strip the leading slash, and then use that as the name of the file in the temporary directory, or the path in the temporary directory. So I spent about 4 months implementing this during the summer. 3.5 months of that was hammering chunking to work with this. So I have an intimate relationship with chunking. It's always in my way. Yep. So this is actually already in 2.4, but it's not really enabled because not everything in 2.3 is sort of compatible with this. But it's already configurable, and we can use this. And it's sort of a prerequisite for future work, because in order to get the correct up levels, you need to do the two-phase parsing in the beginning. Go. Does everyone know? Who doesn't know what up levels is? Okay, so up levels is that when you have a map on one level of the directory tree, and then you still have like topics or other maps or images that are in sibling directories or below that in the directory hierarchy or the tree. And usually that's caused issues in OpenToolkit, like HTML help hasn't worked correctly. In a way, up levels is something that doesn't have a really good name. So if it doesn't have a really good name, let's try and remove it instead of inventing a good name for it. So this has actually been just a sort of like pre-work for the actual stuff we're working with. So then we have the map first pre-process. And some of you might have heard Elliot talk about map-driven processing in DITA for publishers. This isn't it. These are two different things. They can work together, but these are two different things. It's just that the map is the first word in these two. So what this does is it takes the pre-processing and changes the order of things. So that first you start with the map, and then you process the map until you've resolved everything in it without reading a single topic. And that makes sense. Because the topic is basically a list of topics. A map is a list of topics you want to use in your final output. So we first process the map until there's nothing more we can do. Then we read all the topics. And then we do everything with the topics. And this is the way it sort of should have been done from the beginning. But Open Toolkit started with DITA 1.0, or actually the IBM DITA 1.32, whatever it was called. So the original design we have, or we were currently stuck with, started off with a hideously simple DITA. Basically, DITA without any features, just tags. It was basically DocBook. So this is the way it sort of should have been done all along, and I would assume that most CMSs do a similar thing. They don't mix map processing with topic processing unless they have to. And where they have to is chunking. So I won't be able to first process everything in maps and then everything in topics, but then I have to actually go back and process chunking. That's unfortunate. When someone comes up with a better solution, please tell me, or if you already have a solution, please tell me. I'll be really happy to integrate that design into the pre-processing part. Go.
How about we just don't do chunking?
So yeah, why don't we just remove chunking, says the TC member, a voting TC member. Well, some people actually do use chunking. It's a good feature. We don't want to remove it. Right now, the map first processing, I have a branch for it in GitHub. It mostly works. The anchor IDs that are basically used by Eclipse help aren't implemented. The subject scheme processing isn't implemented, partially because it has issues, the way it's undefined in the documentation, in the documentation of DITA, meaning the spec. But it mostly works. Now I just have to get chunking to work properly also. So I don't want to remove anything, and sort of Open Toolkit can't make decisions on its own, because we are not a reference implementation. But we can't break things just because we feel like it. Oh, Jarno thinks it's too difficult. Let's just remove that part of the spec, even though the TC member might disagree. Yeah?
So when I say don't do chunking, what I meant was defer it until the final form processing, where it's actually interesting.
Yeah. So we can try to change the order in which we do things, but of course chunking is somewhat challenging to do. Even the coders here might need to take a few extra days to implement it in their transformation type. So we want to do it as part of pre-processing so that most people don't need to implement it.
Just a couple of things to add on, and hopefully I won't get feedback from being by the speakers. The anchor ref stuff I think is more likely will disappear in 2.0, which might be a nice thing to hear, because I don't think it's used very widely and it's only useful in Eclipse at the moment. But in general, a comment on the map first process. As he said, this set of steps really came from the early beta implementations of DITA in IBM, which then became the toolkit. In those beta days, that list of steps shifted all the time simply based on experience. We started off saying, these are the things we need to do, let's do them. Oh wait, this works better here. Move it around, a whole lot of shuffling. Even after DITA 1.0 to 1.1, 1.2, those steps tended to move until they sort of stabilized into the set of things that worked best for most people, for most situations. That said, it was all sort of learning as we go. And what we've learned since then, when it's become harder to change things for fear of breaking people, is we really should have done it map first in the first place. So, yeah.
Thanks. So, if I were to write a new DITA implementation, this is the approach I would initially start off with, and then maybe change my mind in the development process. But this is something that we probably want to do in 3.0 whenever that is released, because this is a big change. My current plan, which can be vetoed by Robert, is to ship this as an alternative pre-processing step. So we're not going to remove the pre-process and task just because we don't want to break your stuff, but rather we'll come up with a good name for it, like Preprocess 2, and then maybe move all the existing transformation types we currently ship to use the Preprocess 2. And then if people have existing transformations, they can still keep on using the original preprocess. The only problem here is that we're somewhat resource constrained, so being able to keep the old one and develop a new one and share as much code as possible, that might be challenging. But we're still thinking about this. And with this, we'd be able to get rid of up-levels processing, because we'd be using the hashed version of the temporary file names, or then some other scheme that allows us to skip the up-levels processing. This is where I'm certain that this design is better, but it's more complex than the original one in some sense, because it requires the hashed temporary file names and so forth. And whenever you introduce complexity, you might be shooting yourself in the foot, and then you end up in a situation where one person understands how it works, and then that person is hit by a bus. So not sure about this, but that's the reason why I don't want to make this the absolute only way of doing it inside OpenToolkit. I still have 6 minutes. And then we have alternative buckets. So I've been talking about this. I haven't done that much work on this lately, but I still have it as a nice to have sort of thing. And again, the hashed temporary file names makes this easier to work with. So we could use a memory-based bucket or the work cache for files. In cases where you're not that memory constrained, you can keep things in memory, perhaps because the volume is very low, or the file size is very small. So you can keep everything in memory, and we should support that by not writing anything into the disk unless we really have to. And then we have alternative storage formats like Saxon's P3, which is about the same size as XML, but it's faster to parse and serialize. That requires the, I think, enterprise version of Saxon, so you sort of have to pay for it. We would probably ship an implementation that allows you to do it, but of course when it requires software with a separate license or costs, then not everyone would reap the benefits. But once we do this, allowing alternative storage formats, then we can basically offer any kind of buckets you want. If for some reason you want to keep everything in a XML database while you're processing, you could do that. Would be hideously slow, but you could do it. Or you can convert everything into RTF between the modules. Welsh RTF, yeah. So again, this makes things underneath the visible layer a bit more complex. So a bit worried about that. Complexity might not be a good thing, but all of the complexity would be hidden from the normal people. So in XSLT, they could still use document function to access files. They could still use result document to write to the bucket. So it would be hidden. But there would be some benefits. Of course, then you have to choose which sort of bucket do you need, and what sort of buckets can you use, depending on whether you want to shell out few euros for Saxon. I didn't have any questions, which is unfortunate. Do you have any opinions? Do you have any strong opinions that you want to share? Please.
I have a question regarding the filtering part with the print attribute. But so basically, some of the alternative processes to get PDF can go through HTML. So you can go from DITA to HTML and then apply CSS and then render that as PDF. So if the print is used only on the PDF branch, what will happen?
Okay, so
Right.
So
is there a way for my plugin, let's say, to kind of declare, although I'm an HTML based?
Hopefully this is documented because it's been supported for ages. You just, when you define your plugin, you define that this transformation type is a print type. So currently, I wonder actually, is Word a print type or the ODT output type? But then again, we removed OTD from the distribution package already, so we don't have to think about that anymore. So it's configurable. Most things are configurable somehow.
So if you define it as CSS, I've done this with that. If you define this output as print, what does that give you?
It just means that if in your content you have print equals no, then that won't be output anymore. Because you're saying that my transformation type is for print, and if someone or some piece of content is not allowed in print, then it's filtered out. But of course, I mean, the print attribute, it's ancient. DITA 1.3 had an alternative or has an alternative for that, but we still need to support DITA 1.2 and older. We haven't tested whether the content written in DITA 1.1 or 1.0 is still completely processed correctly, because we're always sort of forward-looking. We're talking about DITA 1.3, and that's where our development efforts are. But I'm out of time. Thank you.